Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Stellium Astrology Podcast. I'm Stephanie James, your host and the founder of StelliumAstrology.com. I used to write horoscopes for Elle magazine and I now teach classes for the London School of Astrology. I feel like I'm losing my voice a little bit at the moment, or I've got a bit of a tickly cough. Hopefully it's not the dreaded you-know-what, but probably not. I've probably just chatted away too much today. My Gemini ascendant often gets in situations where it's flapping its gums too much. But anyway, today we are following on in our planetary quest to understand the planets and the luminaries on a deeper level, so that you can make a bit more sense of them in your natal chart. Last week we did the sun, and we are going to complete our short little segment on the luminaries with the moon today. So before I get started, I just wanted to mention, if you didn't catch last week's episode, that I've actually launched my Patreon page now. So check it out, because I've got a couple of tiers on there, and what I'm doing is I'm providing additional content. So basically, if you are interested in hearing about the full moons and the new moons and eclipses and retrograde periods and things like that, I'm doing that. I'm covering that for my Patreons, or patrons as they should be called. But anyway, I thought I'd just mention that for you. So I'll put a link at the bottom of the episode so you can go check it out. But yeah, the planets really are, if you look at them in the context of the natal charts, the planets are kind of like the actors in your chart. They have specific roles. They kind of indicate specific areas of your life that you're going to have certain types of interest in, relating to that planet. And when you find them in a specific sign, the sign is something that they kind of wear as their kind of uniform or their wardrobe, their style or their kind of personality characteristics. And then we will cover the houses later on down the line. And the houses kind of give us a bit more of a location and a bit more of a kind of the character backstory almost, and the kind of scene and setting. So it's interesting to think of the natal chart like that, because it really can start to tell a story. So yeah, without getting too bogged down with all of that, let's get on to the moon. Now the moon is, it's easy to recognise in the birth chart because it actually does look like a crescent moon. The glyph for the moon is a little crescent moon, and it rules the sign of Cancer. So the sign of Cancer, the crab, the glyph for Cancer, you could say it's the breasts, or it's the pincers of the crab. It looks like the symbols of the numbers 69. So it's easy to recognise Cancer as well. And that both the moon and Cancer are connected to the fourth house in astrology, which is the natural home of Cancer. And the moon obviously being the ruling planet of Cancer, or the luminary. We do in astrology tend to call the sun and moon planets, even though they're not. It's just for ease of expression, but actually some people do tend to say the luminaries. Some people just call them planets, planetary bodies. But yeah, the moon is kind of, it's unique in the fact that all of the other planets, other than the sun obviously, are actual planets that orbit the sun. The moon orbits only the earth. So there is a sense with the moon that, we've always had these kind of stories about the moon where the moon is like the great mother who cares for us. She's always there for us, and she's, she appears in the sky. She changes shape. So sometimes she'll be her the full moon in all her glory, and sometimes we'll see her in the sort of like the crescent phase and the half, or the first quarter, the third quarter. So the moon has a very fluctuating nature, and it's very changeable. And the moon actually in astrology is very much connected to our inner environment, much more to do with our habits and our instincts and our emotional nature, and more of the hidden aspects of our personality. It's also the feminine archetype. It's one of the feminine archetypes. So as the sun was the kind of the father, the moon is the mother. And like I said before, if you've got a non-typical kind of parental arrangement that you've grown up with, or you know somebody that does, it may be that the moon might indicate more towards the main caregiver rather than the female role in the household. And astrology does have to kind of adapt and change a bit along with the changes in sort of gender roles and sexual identities and things like that. But actually, you can often find that it's only a part of a bigger picture in the natal chart. So the stories will be explained, the picture will be painted in so many different levels when looking at astrology that, just to break it down as simple as, the moon being the mother or women in general is, it might not be as simple as that. It might not be as cut and dry as that, but it usually does indicate, it usually is a very good indicator of that. So where we see the moon in the chart does kind of describe our mother and our relationship with our mother. It also connects with food. Now, the moon is very connected to a nourishment sense of a nourishing quality. So if we think about the fact that the symbol for Cancer is the breasts, and we think about when we're born, it's our early life with the moon, where the sun is where we're headed to, the moon is where we're coming from. It's the past, it's our early life, it's our earliest learnt behaviours, kind of like almost conditioning that gets passed down through families. So there's a kind of generational feel about the moon, and it's a very personal relationship that you would have with your mother. Even if you've got 3 siblings, every single one of you will have a different relationship with your mum. And you hear about this all the time with brothers and sisters having different relationships, and maybe one thinks that the other one's perceived as a favourite, and one of them thinks the mum's a bit cold, the other one's finds the mum to be a bit stifling. There does seem to be different relationships with the parents expressed through each individual that is born into a family. The moon, like I said, it's kind of like our instincts, our subconscious, our responses, the way we feel, our feeling nature, the conditioning that we receive, and it's our kind of emotional security, and also our need for belonging. The moon is kind of symbolic of the home in many ways, and what we need in order to feel like we can truly be at home and relax. And so the sun and moon are very important planets because they describe an awful lot about our personality. Hence, they are part of the big three being the sun, the moon, and the ascendant. And obviously, like I said, I will get onto the ascendant when we do houses and things like that. So it's important to recognise that when you're looking at somebody's natal chart, when you go from the sun to the moon, you're getting another aspect, another dimension of their personality, which may be a bit more protected than the sun. The sun may be a bit more obvious, the moon is not so much. We have to be careful not to go too deep too quick with some people with their moons because it can be very sensitive. And we have to think about the moon as, it does kind of dictate the tides on Earth. We do find that the tides come and they go, they ebb and they flow with the moon, and the moon really is connected to water. It's very, and Cancer is a sign of water as well. So you have to kind of remember that kind of quality of the essence of the element of water, which can connect to that Cancerian lunar quality. Now, it's not the same. Where the moon is in the chart does not indicate that it is a watery place, but it might be where we absorb our environment a bit more, and depending on which sign, it can describe how absorbent we are. So perhaps a moon in Pisces is going to be incredibly absorbent, like a sponge. It's just going to soak up all the environment around it, whereas perhaps a moon in Capricorn is going to be a little bit more difficult to penetrate. It may be difficult if you know somebody who's got moon in Capricorn. They might seem a bit emotionally closed, as opposed to a moon in Cancer, who will be probably a bit more of an emotional person. So the moon in the signs kind of indicate our kind of need to withdraw sometimes. Some people who have the moon in the feminine signs, the more introverted signs, are probably going to need a bit more alone time, as opposed to people with their moon in air and fire signs, which is very sociable and very adventurous and kind of seem to get a lot out of engaging with other people. In fact, I was talking to somebody, a friend of mine, who's got a stellium in Scorpio, quite a few planets in Scorpio, and a Capricorn ascendant. And I thought, well, that's somebody who's going to be very values like time alone and values time to, stay in and recharge their batteries. But actually, she had a moon in Aquarius, and she said, I just get energy from being around other people. I feel like being around other people really charges up my batteries and makes me feel really alive, which you might not expect from somebody who's got a sun in Scorpio, which is a very private sign, and Capricorn, which is, likes to sort of is quite boundaried. Aquarius is a spacious sign. It likes to have space, but it's also very sociable. So, it's looking at the elements can describe a lot about what that person needs to feel energized and how they can, whether or not what they need to recharge. And again, the luminaries as well are relationship planets, because if we're looking at the fact that they are a masculine or feminine archetype, they're also indicators of what we need in relationships from other people. So the moon probably is the key aspect in that. So if you're looking at a relationship chart, or maybe you're looking at your chart and you're interested in somebody else, and they've got, you've got their birth details, sometimes it's really good to just look at their moon placement and look at yours, and then you can read about what that moon placement needs, and you can think about them on that level. It's very, very good actually to learn about the lunar placement of your partner, because it helps you to really understand their needs, and it makes me personally much more sympathetic towards them when I think a lot of a lack of communication and a misunderstanding about what somebody actually really needs to feel happy can lead to a lot of problems, and you can think that they're just being rude or dismissive, or they're just being purposely oppositional, when actually they're just doing what they need to do to make them feel good. I'll give you an example. Myself, I have a Scorpio moon, and my moon is square Mars in Aquarius. So I have, and it's sextile my sun. So I have moon square Mars and sextile sun in Capricorn. So my moon square Mars does like to have a lot of space. It likes to have a lot of time to do its own thing, like sitting in a room on my own at home doing a podcast, for example. And it's quite a sensitive moon. It really soaks up the environment. Scorpio moon can really feel what's going on around them, can be quite psychic. My partner has an Aries moon in conjunction with Mars, and his moon is square. His moon Mars is square Neptune. So that's somebody who, moon Mars in Aries loves a bit of competition, loves the drama of the competition, likes really into sports, and it's an 11th house moon, which is very sociable, very friendly, enjoys group activities. He loves going to the football. He loves going to a football match, and he'd go every single weekend to the football or pop out to the pub to watch the football with his friends. And then that square from Neptune is, there's a bit of a struggle with boundaries. So he doesn't necessarily know what appropriate boundaries are when it comes to family issues. And perhaps, there's a little bit too much emphasis on escapism through the sports and through the family activities. So they do like to have a drink, they do like to go out and, watch the football and that. And they also have a relationship where they're very much in each other's pockets all the time on video calls, and which is fine. But for somebody who's a Scorpio moon who prefers to close all the doors, I'm a Capricorn with a Scorpio moon, close all the doors, and once the doors are closed, that's it. I'm in my cave, leave me alone. Sending me messages is okay, I'll respond in my own time. I just need that kind of privacy, and I don't want people invading my personal space. Well, for him, he needs that. That's part of what he needs. He needs that interaction, he needs that contact. He's really social, he loves the sport and the competition. And if I didn't know his birth chart, I don't know if our relationship would have lasted as long, just purely because it drives me a little bit mad. But I also understand that I know what he needs, and he needs that in order to feel sane and safe and happy. So it's about learning to compromise when you look at a relationship chart in astrology. But what's really interesting is to look at the moon and understand them on their lunar level, because it's so telling how important something is to somebody based on their moon placement. Another person I know, my friend Tamara, she was in a relationship with somebody who, and this is another thing you'll find with relationships, they tend to embody the sign that you lack in your chart. So you can figure out which sign is strongest and which is weakest. And for her, she lacked Libra. The partner she attracted was a Libra with an Aquarius moon. So there was a very airy quality about her partner, and her partner wanted lots of space. Whereas Tamara has a Taurus moon, likes to be close, likes lots of touching. It's very tactile, it's very sensual, and it's a bit. The Aquarius moon is a little bit like, don't touch. You know, we don't need to constantly touch all the time. You know, I'm not saying all Aquarius moons are like that, but there is a sense of with the Taurus moon they want to be close and tactile and touching, and the Aquarius moon kind of wants a bit of distance and a bit of space, and it's more about the intellectualism of a relationship rather than the physicality. So it's very interesting to look at these things, because you will understand that when somebody's saying, no, I'm not in the mood today, I don't really want to be squished and cuddled and I just need a bit of space, instead of taking it personally and thinking, why, what have I done? Take a look at their chart. Where is their moon? What does their moon say about what they need? And, where's the current moon? Because sometimes when the moon is transiting, we can actually look at what people are going to be feeling like in relation to the transiting moon. I think I mentioned a couple of episodes ago that when the moon's in Capricorn, for a long time it was really, really difficult for a lot of people, because we had Saturn, Pluto and Jupiter in there. And oh my goodness, every time the moon was in Capricorn, in fact, every time the moon got to Libra and it started getting closer and closer to Capricorn, I was really, really feeling it. It was really, really heavy and really difficult. But, when the moon's in Cancer, we might be a bit more emotional. Often we are. If the moon is in Leo, we might be more inclined to want to experience the finer things in life and, dress in our best clothes and eat good food and, just enjoy some luxury. And when the moon is perhaps, I don't know, in Virgo, we're good at getting organised and sorting ourselves out. And getting ourselves prepared and just getting on with the work and not really getting distracted. Whereas when the moon's in Gemini, oh my goodness, constantly texting people, having multiple conversations. It's very interesting to follow the moon around the zodiac. So I would highly advise, like I did last time with following the sun around the zodiac, if you'd like to get in contact with what the moon means, actually track the moon on a daily basis. Follow it by the sign, keep a diary, talk about how you're feeling, make sure you write down the time and date that you're actually entering this stuff into your diary. And I always got into the habit, no matter where I was, if it was an astrology class or if it was, studying a different subject, like when I did counselling skills, I'd always go into the session and write down sun in Cancer, moon in Pisces, and, just whatever the moon phase is. And sometimes it might be interesting to note where Mercury is as well. And often when the moon was in water signs, it would be a really emotional session. And then when the moon was in air signs, we'd have a very interesting debate about, all the different facets of, a helping interaction in counselling. So it's very interesting to connect with what the moon feels like. It's also interesting to notice what people are talking about when the moon is in different signs. I remember being in a job once and talking about, suddenly the conversation went a bit heavy and we were talking about protecting our passwords and our bank accounts, and I don't really know what it was, but we were talking about like protecting our identity online. And when I checked where the moon was, it was in Scorpio, which is a very private sign that likes to protect its privacy. It can be very secretive. What you see is not always what you get with Scorpio. It's only the tip of the iceberg that they show you. And particularly with the Scorpio moon, you never really know how deep those emotions are running. It's incredibly, their emotions run incredibly deep with Scorpio moon. So let's have a look. So I've said that the signs ruled, the moon rules Cancer. And the mythology, there's so many different lunar deities and lunar mythologies. But I've got here a few that I've noted. Artemis, Diana. Now, Princess Diana was Cancerian. She had an Aquarius moon, a community moon. Hecate, Luna, and Selene. So there are a few lunar deities, and the colours that go with the moon are silvers, pale whites, and greys. Now, it's often somebody who has is quite lunar. Their weight may fluctuate, particularly if they have moon on the ascendant, for example. They may have a relationship with food which could be quite complex sometimes, and sometimes they can be incredibly full, and sometimes they can wane. They can wax and wane throughout their lifetime. And when I think about one person in particular who I know who has moon in Cancer rising, and when I say moon rising in Cancer, moon bang on the ascendant in Cancer, it's my dear old mama. And she has had a fluctuating figure in her lifetime. She's, I think when she was younger, she was naturally quite slim, and then as she got older, she struggled with her weight because, when you get your own place, you start eating whatever you want, and then you realise, oh my gosh, I'm piling it on. She had me and my sister, and then she was a very cuddly mummy figure. She was a very full moon while we were little children. And then she's kind of been on diets and lost weight and then regained weight. So she's never really been one steady weight, but she has been for quite a few years much slimmer. But I think it's, when you have like moon rising, for example, particularly in Cancer, food is going to be a big deal for you. What's really interesting is my sister is Cancerian, and her partner has a Cancer ascendant, and both of her children have Cancer rising as well. So it's interesting that there's a Cancerian theme running through my sister's family. But aside from that, yes, the colours, you'll see people that are quite lunar might wear sort of quite pale colours and quite, like whites and off-whites and nice grey colours. Kind of almost what I'm imagining at the moment is, those lovely... you see pictures of the weddings, and the modern weddings are quite, the bridal colours are like sort of pinks, like really pastel pinks and silvers and pale whites and greys and stuff like that, and getting that kind of almost marital image there. And the metal that is connected to the moon is silver, and the part of the body is the stomach, which is where we receive the nourishment that we need, which is where the food sits in our stomach, and also the breasts. So the breasts being connected to femininity, womanliness, and also a source of nourishment for the newborn. Interesting to think that, you can have a baby, and the baby... I was reading, what's it called? The Science Delusion by Rupert Sheldrake, and he was talking about the fact that they separated mothers and children, like mums that had just had babies. They just for the sake of the experiment separated them, and the baby would cry and be completely out of any kind of hearing range of the mother, and they wanted to know if there was a connection between the mum knowing when the baby needed to be fed, or whether the baby crying was what triggered the mum to lactate. And it turned out that they could be in separate buildings, and the mum's boobs would start to tingle, ready to lactate, and they would get the timing and everything ready, to compare. And it turned out that the mum just intuitively had this connection with her child. Even though the child wasn't with her, she could sense when the baby needed to be fed and would start producing the milk, and the baby would be in another place crying for its mum to feed it. So that is really fascinating, and also lends itself to the intuitive quality of the moon. The moon is where we just know things sometimes. The moon is where we have an intuition for something. It's where we kind of have to trust our gut. If we look back at the part of the body, the stomach knows. Feel the gut move up. That feeling of positivity that we get, that's your inner compass saying yes. And when you feel your stomach sinking, it's kind of like saying, no, there's something not right about this situation. And that is very much a lunar kind of knowing. So other things that are connected, I think, with the moon are our ancestral inheritance. Like I said, there's a kind of generational connection. It can be the line of the feminine line of perhaps your mum, your grandmother, and going back through that kind of maternal past. I think also it could be connected to your father's mother as well, not just your mother's mother, but also your father's mother, and going back through that line, the female figureheads in the family, perhaps. And it definitely connects to childhood and the kind of conditioning that we get through childhood when growing up, the things that make us feel safe and the things that frighten us, that we don't really understand, the things that we pick up from our parents that, perhaps weren't, maybe they don't make sense always, maybe they're not rational, but it's something that we pick up through our parents. And yet the moon kind of really represents cycles as well. So it's connected to the monthly cycle for women, the menstrual cycle. The moon takes 28 days to orbit the Earth. And also the female cycle is approximately every 28 days. And this is a great one to look at, actually. I'll have to try and find an image to share. But if you think about the female cycle and the lunar cycle, if you think about the moon in the new moon phase, so when it's like when you can't see it in the sky, that is when we are menstruating. And then when we get to the first quarter moon, when it's waxing up, that is where we are at a phase where we're no longer bleeding, because the first day of the period is the beginning of the cycle again. So 7 days later, it's the pre-ovulation the pre-ovulation phase. And then once we're at full moon, that's technically the ovulation period. And then when it's waning back down to the third quarter moon, this is where we have pre-menstruation. So that's that final week when you start getting PMT and feeling grouchy and reaching for chocolate and crisps when you know you shouldn't. And then we get back to the new moon phase, and the first day of bleeding being the beginning of the next cycle. So it's interesting to think that we can have 7 days per phase for the moon, which really is not just connected outside, but also inside. And, it's the lunar cycle. And they do say that women go a bit loony sometimes on their period. And the word loony, lunatic, is very connected to the word lunar as well. So as annoying as it is that people might say that, there is a connection with that, which is very, very interesting. Like I said, the moon also connects us to emotions. And if you think about the menstrual cycle, it is a very emotional time for women to have this big hormonal cycle that just keeps looping round and round every month until they go to the menopause and no longer menstruate anymore. But even then, it's a time of crazy hormones and things like that. So it's women do tend to have a bit more of a roller coaster to experience every month. And men do have their own cycle, but their cycle is interesting because the lunar cycle is a 28-day cycle and connects to the female menstrual cycle. But men also have their own hormonal cycle, which sort of seems to repeat itself every 24 hours, peaking usually in the mornings when they wake up with a bit of morning wood. So it's interesting to think that you could almost say that for men, the cycle is almost like it refreshes every single day, as opposed to women who have this monthly, you can rely on it. So it's almost like the sun rises every single day and sets every day, and that's the men's hormonal cycle. And then for women, we've got this moon having to go through every single phase until she gets back to her starting point, and that's every 28 days, and that's the lunar cycle for women and the connection with our bodies. Like I said as well before, that we're not necessarily connected to being female being literally meaning woman, or the feminine archetypes necessarily being totally indicative of whether or not the moon represents women or not. Actually, there is the feminine side of the self, so it doesn't necessarily have to be, you can get people that are more feminine than others, more effeminate than others, and some that are more masculine. There are women who are incredibly masculine and men who are incredibly feminine. It's if you're a lunar type, if you've got stronger passive planets, or perhaps more of a feminine expression in the chart, you may lean towards what is considered to be a more feminine expression, or being more in touch with your feminine side of self, the feminine side of yourself. So yes, other things that the moon's connected to, like I said, food, particularly milk is connected. If you think about the fact that when women have a baby, they lactate, they produce milk, and this is the nourishing nectar which gives a baby everything it needs, including something my sister told me about, and I think I mentioned this probably in the episode for Cancer, that when a baby is feeling unwell, or if it needs particular nutrients, the baby, just by connecting with the mother and breastfeeding with the mother, the mother's body knows how to create, the breasts know how to create the exact nutrients that the baby needs in order to feel, in order to be nourished, and in order to receive the medicine that it needs. I also heard that in another book as well. I can't remember which book it was now, but I actually heard that, and they said if you do breastfeed and you pump and you freeze your milk, it's often best not to wait ages and ages before you use it, because that what might be nutritional for your baby down the line, it won't correlate with what you're producing currently. So it's interesting that the body can do that. It's really interesting. And again, it's that amazing intuitive connection that the body has. But yeah, so also the past and receptivity and reflection as well. It's our reflective nature. It's a much more looking back. I tend to think of the moon almost like when you're driving down the road and it's nighttime and you're driving, driving to your destination, and you catch a glimpse of the moon in the rearview mirror. There's almost that sense of the moon sits at the back of the mind and the sun sits at the front, and we can see the sun, we're aware of the sun, we can connect with the sun, we are working towards it, we are identifying with it in aspects of our personality, whether we like it or not. But the moon is constantly at the back of our mind, it's constantly there with us. It's almost dictating how we react to things. And so actually, what's another interesting thing to look at is when I was talking about the modes, the episodes that I did on the modes, which is our way of dealing with conflict, it's interesting to observe the modes that you find your sun and moon in, and your ascendant, because it will indicate how you, that will indicate more so how you deal with conflict. So perhaps a moon in a fixed sign like mine can feel a bit stuck in a situation sometime and just decides to stay put because I don't really know what's the best thing to do. Whereas a moon in a cardinal sign will, face some kind of challenge and think, right, how can I change my situation? What can I do to, start over? How can I create a better situation for myself? And maybe wouldn't think twice about, looking for a new job, for example, or finding a new relationship. Somebody I know who's very cardinal, and they had a mutable moon in Sagittarius, so a very cardinal chart with a mutable moon, had some challenges at work, and even though we're at the height of a pandemic and the job market was scarce, they just said, I'm leaving, left their job very spontaneously, and then went out, looked for a job, applied for it, and got the first job that they found. That's so mutable, having a problem, and instead of sort of hanging on and probably enduring all sorts of crap that they really didn't need to, they just went, right, that's it, I'm moving, I'm changing, and that's that. I don't need to stay here, and literally finding a new pathway to walk down, a different road completely, and a different approach. And I admired that about her because it was so ballsy. I just thought if it was me, I'd probably have stayed in that situation for ages with my fixed moon, because there's a certain sense of security about predictability and knowing what to expect, and just, I suppose, the not knowing what's going to happen and not having an unpredictable job market, and also having the difficulty of being able to see other ways, other options, without having to uproot yourself so much. With fixed moons, they tend to get very rooted into things, and it can be very difficult to pick it up and change course. It's almost like a big heavy, if you think of cars or something, if you think of cars, you could think of maybe a mutable sign is a car made out of carbon fibre, which you can almost, a bunch of you could lift it up relatively easily and plonk it down. And, a fixed car maybe might be a DeLorean, which is notoriously heavy, so heavy that it was just, it couldn't reach certain speeds because the metal that they used was ridiculous. And as for a cardinal car, I guess I'd have to say something sporty that is designed for speed, but isn't. I don't know. I'm just getting Ferrari. Maybe I'm channeling my inner Aries there. It's my Mars I'm channeling. I don't know why I went on the car analogy, but I thought it's quite interesting to think about how the different modes might deal with certain conflicts. And usually fixed moons will stay put. Cardinal moons will come up with solutions, and mutable moons will just completely change direction and go a different way. And so again, think about the modes, and if you haven't listened to those shows, go back and listen. It's really useful to understand how the elements and the modes really flavour how a planet will operate. So it's a very interesting, astrology is so multifaceted. There's so many dimensions of astrology that can really, you could decide to just interpret the chart based on the elements and modes alone, looking at the moon, and instead of saying, oh, it's moon in Sagittarius, you're an adventurer, you're brave, you might work in publishing one day, you're very good at spreading a message, and you're probably quite somebody who's open to a lot of different ideas and philosophies. You could look at just the fact that it's a fire sign and it's mutable and just explore it on that level only, and probably get quite a lot of interesting responses from people that you're reading for. So definitely go back and listen to the elements and modes if you haven't. I think that definitely looking at the moon, we definitely see female role models in the moon. It definitely connects us. We definitely connect to our feelings. Like I was saying before about reflection, the moon is also about memory, where we store our memories, where we store our, it's quite sentimental, I suppose. The moon can be quite sentimental, and I think the moon can be an area of the chart where we can hold on to things. If we think about the fact that Cancer is a water sign and can be perhaps a bit retentive, I think that the moon also can absorb and be retentive. It depends on the sign. There can be minimalistic aspects with the moon where you don't really want to be surrounded by clutter and holding onto things too much, or like the actual emotional holding on. So signs like a Scorpio moon, for example, maybe a Taurus moon would hold on to things, whereas some maybe mutable or fire signs definitely, I think, tend to let go a lot easier. So it's thinking about how the element or the mode might operate in that respect as well. And I think really that the moon really displays where we feel secure, and displays our survival instincts as well, because really when it comes down to a base level, when we are looked after by our mums, when we're born, when we have that connection with our mothers in our childhood, we feel safe. But we don't always have that safety. Not everybody has the luxury of having that connection with the mother growing up. So the moon might describe our very early environment, our relationship with our mother, whether we felt safe and whether we feel safe now, and what makes us feel safe, and also what our survival instincts are. A great example of survival instincts was when there was rumours of a global lockdown, or like a national lockdown in the UK, and going to the supermarkets and all the shelves were empty, and it was a very surreal experience to be looking around and knowing that the North Node was in Cancer. I'll get into the nodes at some point, but they're the points where the path of the sun and moon cross over. So it's kind of like a calculated point, but they're very, very poignant, because it's at the point of the nodes is where, if the sun and moon are near those nodes, that's where we get eclipses. and eclipses in astrology are quite a big deal. So yeah, basically seeing the empty shelves in the supermarket as a result of having the North Node in Cancer and the South Node in Capricorn, and people panic buying and buying toilet roll, lots of toilet roll, to the fact that it had to be rationed, and buying food, stocking up. It was literally, that was the panic response to a global pandemic, and the thought that we might be unable to get food and how are we going to survive. That was a very, very dark time for humanity, really, on a whole. I mean, we're still going through it and it's still a dark time, but I think at the very beginning, when you go to the supermarket and you start seeing all the shelves are empty, it really strikes a chord of fear. It did in me. I just remember thinking, this is actually terrifying. And just having to trust that everything was okay and that things would be okay. That's all you got. That's all you could do. But the moon in the chart could indicate. It does indicate what we do to survive. What threatens our security and what threatens our inner peace, really. So anyway, that's kind of a bit of waffle about the moon. I hope you found it interesting. I did have a look at a couple of charts. I have got a few charts that I need to explore, which I will do. A few new ones have come through, but I haven't had a chance to cast them yet and look at where they'll fit in. But I have a couple of charts here with the moon in fairly prominent positions. I've got Rhiannon, who has a moon in Taurus and also Jupiter in Taurus, but they're about 7 degrees apart, so it's quite wide, but still technically a conjunction. And Rhiannon has the moon in the first house because Rhiannon also has Taurus rising. So Rhiannon may relate to issues of a lunar nature. And what I always find, there's an interesting relationship between Taurus and Cancer because they are both very foodie signs. Taurus is very foodie because Taurus is it's very sensual and it likes flavours. It's almost the connoisseur about Taurus. They enjoy the sensual aspect of eating. And with Cancer, there is the, like being nourished and enjoying food. There is this very lunar quality about, well, there's a very, there's strong connections with food and eating and feeling nourished with the moon, with Cancer and Taurus. So having moon in Taurus, there is definitely, I believe the moon is technically what they call exalted in Taurus as well, which means moon is extremely high functioning in Taurus. Some people think that exalted means that it's really a positive thing and it's really great to have an exalted planet, but it might actually mean that it's functions too highly. So food, having the moon in Taurus could be an extremely you have to think of it like when a planet's exalted, it's almost like they're treated like a VIP. They're invited in and they're given star treatment. But the problem is you might get one of those diva planets who demands, like Mariah Carey, demanding puppies and kittens and all sorts of weird demands. But yes, to have moon in Taurus in the first house, it might describe that there's a very, very strong emphasis on food and family. And with Jupiter there as well, slightly wide but still there, it may blow those issues out of proportion a bit. It could be a really big family that you have to mingle with on a regular basis. It could be that there may be a little bit of a difficulty in being able to know when to stop when it comes to enjoying food, in doing things that, enjoyable activities to you. So if it's going out to restaurants, there's, maybe going out to parties and stuff. A moon Jupiter is going to be much more, it's a very sociable moon, to have a moon Jupiter conjunction and a larger than life personality in the first house. But it could dictate that you could override your logic sometimes with the need to fill some kind of void for yourself. whether that be through feeding or socialising. But anyway, Rhiannon, you have Moon in Taurus and it's in the first house and it will be rising shortly. It's not quite rising at that moment, but it's not far from rising. It's only a few degrees away. And we also have Angelique, we talked about your chart a long time ago, and you have got Moon in Leo and it sits right at the top of your chart in the 10th house. So that's a very prominent position for you. And it could be that actually your career in some way involves a caring role in some way. It could be that you end up living and working in the same premises or working from home. I think that's probably a likely outcome for many people now. But maybe prior to this pandemic, working from home would have been something people would hope to be able to do, as opposed to actually having the luxury of doing it. Not that it's really a luxury to work from home. It depends what you actually do. But yes, having the Moon there in the 10th house, you could take on a bit of a maternal role in your work, caring for your colleagues, or you could be in a caregiving role in some sense, because the Moon is the caregiver. It is a kind of mother figure. So having the Moon up there in the 10th house, you could well be that for somebody. You might not see it right now, but it may be as time goes on, because you are, in my opinion, a spring chicken born in 1999. You're a spring chicken. So I just thought that'd be interesting. I don't have lots of prominently lunar types. There is one other person, actually. Where are you? Where is my lovely Vanessa? I'm just looking through my little cards that I've made. Where is she? There she is, Vanessa. Vanessa has Sun, Jupiter, Chiron, Moon and Venus in Cancer, and she also has a Taurus ascendant. So we have joked about the fact that Taurus does enjoy food, and so does Cancer. And food does seem to play a bit of a role, whether it's feeding yourself or not feeding yourself, which we talked about when you had a bit of a low period and you lost a lot of weight. It can be indicative of the mood. It's food is mood, really, for Cancer. So comfort eating can be a problem. And I think that can be an issue for Taurus as well. So having a Taurus ascendant and a Cancer stellium, food is mood is the motto. And it can be a bit of a battle trying to do what you know is right logically over what you feel like doing. So there's another person who's got a bit of a, when I say prominent Moon position, it's because there's so much Cancer in the chart. And, she's her ruling planet, Venus, is in conjunction with the Moon. So the chart ruler being Venus, because it rules Taurus, and then the ruler of her Sun in Cancer, which is the Moon. So the Moon-Venus conjunction in that chart is a very key conjunction, which we did explore during our classes and during our various get-togethers, didn't we, Vanessa? And we found some very interesting connections down some of your maternal line. And it was very interesting and a bit of a revelation. It's always interesting when you meet somebody, you look at your chart, you look at their chart, you pick something up and you think, I'll mention that. And then when they say, yes, that's actually right, I have had that did happen, or yes, I've recognised that in my life. So it's interesting. These things can appear during your consultations, and it's always a pleasant surprise to hear that the astrology just doesn't ever seem to lie. It always tells the truth. So if we think about the Sun, which has seasons, we have like I said last episode, we have spring, summer, autumn and winter, which is almost, if you think about the first quarter, the full moon, the third quarter, and then the new moon potentially being winter, first quarter being spring, full moon being summer, and the third quarter being autumn. It's interesting that the Moon and the Sun both have seasons and phases. So it's worth looking at the seasonal phase that we're currently in and seeing how you feel and how you connect to that. And also quite interesting to connect to, maybe which season or phase you may be in at your point in your life as well. So just some food for thought there. And just one person I thought I'd pick out as a celebrity chart today. a AA Rodden rating, so we can trust it. And I picked Kurt Russell, and the reason I picked Kurt Russell is because he's kind of like a famous family man. He's got Moon in Cancer rising, and he also has his ascendant in Cancer. So, when I say his Moon's rising, it's in the first house. It's not quite rising. He's got Uranus rising actually, but he's got Moon and Uranus in Cancer. So you might look at that and think unconventional family, perhaps. And he also has Sun in Pisces up there on the midheaven as well, or very close to the midheaven. So Kurt Russell is married to Goldie Hawn, and he is the stepdad of Kate Hudson, who, depending on your age, you may know Kate Hudson more than Goldie Hawn. And he has a good relationship with his family. The reason I picked him was because he's in a film, I think it's called The Christmas Chronicles, and the recent Christmas Chronicles film he did it with Goldie Hawn, his wife, as a she was Mrs. Claus, so he was Mr. Santa Claus and she was Mrs. Claus, and I just thought it was nice to think that he is associated with the woman in his life in a way that a man with Moon rising might very much be connected to, or be mentioned as part of his relationship with his wife or with his partner, as opposed to if he had a Moon anywhere else in the chart, he might be seen more as an individual. But the Moon being there rising definitely has a sense of being connected to usually the mother, and usually with family in some way. Like I said, my mum has Moon rising in Cancer as well, and she has always been very, very close to her mum and has been a main caregiver for her mum in her later years. And so one last final thought for you to look at with your own charts is to look at the actual phase that the Moon was in your chart. So for example, with Kurt Russell, the Moon is in Cancer and the Sun is in Pisces, which means it's waxing up to be full, because when the Moon will get to Virgo, opposite the Sun in Pisces, that is when it would be a full moon. So this might describe a personality who is a bit more outgoing and open, as opposed to somebody who, if they were born on a new moon, might not be so outgoing, much more reserved perhaps. And then you might get a full moon type. I'll give you someone who was born on a full moon. Donald Trump. Come on now. Look at that personality. That's a very full moon personality. And a very Gemini Sagittarius, chatty, foot and mouth syndrome type of full moon. So have a look at your moon and see where it is from the sun. Is it travelling towards or away from the sun? If you're not sure, get in touch with me and I'll see if I can help you out. Stephanie@stelliumastrology.com. Don't forget to check out my Patreon page. I'll put a link in the description. And if you're enjoying this podcast, take your phone out your pocket, take a screenshot, upload it onto Instagram and tag @StelliumAstro. I'd love to hear what you think about the shows. And yeah, don't forget to subscribe, rate and review if you're enjoying. It's just something that helps other people find me and what I'm doing, and also just fills me with that fuzzy, warm feeling of happiness. So give me the warm and fuzzies and give me a nice review on iTunes. Okay, you guys, take care. Next time we're going to be talking about the very first in the personal planets, Mercury. Take care, guys. Bye.